My name is Brian Evans. I was the 1974 Circumnavigators Club Fellowship Scholar from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. My topic was Grassroots of Nationalism, Why People Love Their Countries. I was selected by the New York chapter of the club, and I visited or transited 30 countries, 31 if you count Hong Kong, and I was also the first bearded, and you may not be able to tell anymore, red-headed scholar. As a freshman at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, during my first semester, I read in the school paper about Greg Ryder, who had been the foundation scholar that summer and had gone around the world in 90 days. And I thought that this was an amazing opportunity and something that I wanted to do my junior year. So as a sophomore, I found myself having to make a choice. I had been accepted by the London School of Economics for junior year abroad, but I found out that the Circumnavigators Club Foundation would not interview anyone who was overseas at the time of their interviews, which was in April of the junior year. So I ended up canceling my junior year abroad and spent the year at Georgetown instead. In April of 1974, I was one of 16 School of Foreign Service juniors to be interviewed in the dean's office by a committee of 4 circumnavigators, Ray Dinsmore, Bill Geyer, Mike Watabe, and John Johannesson. These interviews were 20 minutes long, and they lasted from 9 until 3 o'clock with a break for lunch. I was the last person interviewed in the morning and did pretty well on my interview. But at the very end, Ray Dinsmore, who chaired the committee, said that he was concerned that I had not thought through how I was going to communicate with people from so many different countries in languages that I did not understand, and that he wanted me to come back at the end of the afternoon at 3 o'clock and answer that question for them. Well, this left me with an acute sense of indigestion over lunch as I tried to figure out how I was going to answer this question to the satisfaction of the committee. I called my father and used him as a sounding board and as a cheerleader to keep my spirits up, and went back at 3 o'clock, answered the questions to their satisfaction, and received the fellowship. It was 1974, a period of time when the United States was under intense criticism at home and abroad over the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. So I chose a topic that would elicit conversations with people overseas about how much they love their own countries, rather than on how much they thought the United States should change our foreign policies. And I think that by accentuating the positive, I was able to get a lot more access to people and have much more enjoyable conversations. I also thought that this topic would be one that would help me develop my investigative, representational, and analytical skills that I hope to use in a foreign affairs career with the U.S. government eventually. And I've found that nationalism was something that was based on a shared identity, interest, values, and history among the people, regardless of where the boundaries were drawn and what the historical territorial claims were. And I also found that people who were away from their home countries, whether touring or studying or working as expatriates, that they tended to be more reflective and nuanced and tolerant of foreign cultures, as well as being more sentimental and nostalgic for what they missed about their home countries. Well, there were quite a few memorable moments on my circumnavigation. Rather than take you country by country on a description of my adventures, I'd like to just very quickly go through my top 20 impressions from that summer. Number one, in Japan, I remember staying at a beautiful traditional Japanese villa overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Two, I remember in Taiwan reacquainting myself with family, friends, and visiting my old grade school from when I had been a military dependent there. In Hong Kong, I had the distinctive experience of staying with the Marine Security Guard detachment at the Consulate General. In Thailand, I was able to hold a gibbon and ride an elephant, which were both fun experiences. Singapore, I remember for its exotic sidewalk food stalls, which were fun to explore what was available in the country. It was also a little bit risky, trying all sorts of different foods under a variety of sanitary conditions. In Bangladesh, I was struck by the fact that there were so many Bangladeshis who were resentful of the lack of progress made in their country since their civil war or war of independence with Pakistan a couple of years earlier. And that was perhaps the only country that I visited where it was very difficult to find people who were proud of their country. In India, I was privileged to be invited to a traditional Hindu wedding. And of course, I made the obligatory pilgrimage to the Taj Mahal, which lived up to its reputation as one of the scenic wonders of the world. In Nepal, I enjoyed just walking around Kathmandu, which was, had all the appearances of a medieval town, and to just casually explore the various stupas or temples that would pop up in various neighborhoods of the city. I was struck by how European the streets and stores and restaurants were in Tehran. I was only there for a few hours on a layover, but it was something that showed me at least one view of what life was like under the Shah, although I did not have the opportunity to go out into the hinterlands and see where so many people were that resented the rule of the Shah. In Egypt, of course, going through the pyramids, actually going inside a pyramid was great. I don't know if people can do that anymore. And riding a camel out into the desert without falling off, that was quite an accomplishment. Then moving to Cyprus, it was fascinating to talk with the Turkish and Greek Cypriots on the island about their sense of nationalism, especially because of the fact that 2 weeks after my visit, the Turkish army invaded the northern half of the island. So I could tell that that was a country that really did not have a sense of national identity, a unified sense of national identity. And in fact, the presidential mansion, which is occupied by the Archbishop, at that point Makarios, did not fly a Cypriot flag. It flew a Greek flag. Moving on to Turkey, navigating my way through the meandering Grand Bazaar in Istanbul was a fun experience. And of course, seeing the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. It was a great place to visit. Then moving on to Greece, the highlight there was visiting the Acropolis. I didn't have enough funds to take the bus up, so I walked up to the Acropolis, and it was a long, hot trip. Much easier going down than going up. Then I was in Yugoslavia, in fact, two places in Yugoslavia. One was in modern Serbia, and the second one was in modern Croatia. And again, this was another place where you did not get a sense of people being proud to be Yugoslavs. They were proud to be Serbs or proud to be Croats. Next stop, I went off to Italy and to the Vatican, and it was great to tour St. Peter's Basilica and the Sistine Chapel, and I felt like these were holy shrines, but in my mind they did not match what I saw later on in Norway, just walking along the edges of the fjord. Next, I was in San Marino, a tiny republic on top of a mountain in Italy, and I took the train from there all the way up to Copenhagen, an overnight train, and that was quite an experience. I learned that if you buy a non-smoking seat, or a seat in a non-smoking section with guaranteed seat for overnight, that does not guarantee that you will get your seat or that no one will smoke in your section. It was a long night. Next to Norway, where as I mentioned earlier about how much I love the fjords and also the Viking Ship Museum, but my best discovery there was something that they called soft is, or soft ice cream, which was the richest, creamiest ice cream that you'll ever find in the world, and it was delicious. The next highlights were from France, climbing the stairs to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and then less strenuously strolling around the gardens of Versailles. These were must-dos as a tourist, and enjoyed them very much. And then in London, I was, I was, just overwhelmed by the city of London, walking around London, but particularly, more than the museums, more than the monuments or Parliament or anything, I fell in love with the London bookstores. This was the golden age of London bookstores, and you could find books on any subject in the world. And in fact, at one bookstore, I purchased a biography of Ferdinand Magellan, which had been published that year in England, and presented it to the Circumnavigators Club Foundation upon my return, in honor of the patron saint of the foundation, Ferdinand Magellan. And finally, last but not least, visiting the Thingvellir, which is the site of the ancient Icelandic parliament, the Althing, that is still in existence today and is over 1,000 years old. In fact, it's going on 1,100 years old now. So those are just the highlights. Getting ready for this this video, I was just overwhelmed by how many memories came back and how much you can cram into a summer of hard traveling. Well, I enjoyed Japan, which was my first stop. It was also someplace where I learned a valuable lesson about Japanese culture. Mike Watabe, who had been on the foundation's selection board, had provided me with contacts in Tokyo. And one of these contacts booked me into a very nice hotel in downtown Tokyo. Unfortunately, the hotel was $25 a night, which doesn't sound like much, but my travel budget was $5 a day. And I would not be able to complete my trip if I stayed for a full week at that hotel in Tokyo. So I had to ask the contact, as politely as I could, if it would be possible for me to find alternative accommodations. And he smiled in embarrassment, and his face reddened, and I knew that it was a faux pas, but I could not find any other means of taking care of the situation. I said, I'll be back a little bit later today, and I'll take you to your new accommodations. So I said, thank you very much. And a few hours later, he shows up in front of my hotel in the company car and says, please get in, and it'll, it's a bit away. And I said, all right. And he took me in the car for over an hour to a town called Gotemba, outside of Tokyo, a seaside town, and dropped me off at his company president's vacation villa, which was a traditional Japanese-style villa, complete with staff, and it was located atop a cliff that you just had to walk 25 feet from the house, and you were overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was one of the most beautiful settings that I've ever stayed, and it was great. But I also realized that I had incurred, on behalf of Mike Watabe, my sponsor from the foundation, I had incurred a debt of obligation to the contact and the contact's president. And I've often wondered what Mike had to do later on to pay them back. But it was a dramatic introduction to the idea of face and obligation in East Asian cultures. Ray Dinsmore, who had chaired the selection committee from the foundation, had asked me to clarify how I was going to communicate with people overseas on my topic, or just even to get around without speaking their languages. The foreign language that I had studied in school, in junior high school, and college, had been Spanish. So of course I picked no Spanish-speaking countries for my circumnavigation. But I found that my comfort level, my relatively good comfort level in Spanish, came in handy in a variety of places during my circumnavigation. The first was in Japan. And you may wonder, how would you use Spanish in Japan? But the street signs were all transliterated from the Japanese characters. So you were able to look at the Romanized version of the words. And I quickly figured out that if you pronounce them like Spanish, but with no accents, and you had the vowels all sound like Spanish rather than English, you were much more likely to be understood when you were asking directions as you were trying to go around the country. The second place was in Nepal, where I had met an elderly Argentinian couple at the airport going into Kathmandu. And I had struck up conversation with them in Spanish. They did not speak any English. When they were picked up to go to their hotel, the hotel representative, realizing that I could speak Spanish and that he could not, and that no one else on their staff could speak Spanish, invited me to stay for free at the hotel for 3 days while the Argentinian couple was visiting. The man, the Argentinian husband, was a travel writer, and the hotel was very eager to make a good impression on him and his wife. So I spent the next 3 days traveling around Kathmandu and the surrounding countryside with this couple and interpreting for them into Spanish. And it was a unique way to get to know one of the most exotic countries in the world. Now, third time that I used my Spanish was in Italy. I found that when I was traveling around on trains or public transportation, such as buses, that if I used my Spanish, but said it sort of as clearly as I could and mimicked Italian gestures that I had observed, and then worked in some Italian endings to words that I was picking up, that I was able to communicate fairly well and was able to have serious discussions about nationalism and other issues in my pidgin Italian. And the students were very welcoming and forgiving, as I'm sure I amused them a great deal with my poor Italian, but passable. And finally, in France, I was supposed to be staying as a guest of a French company that I met the representatives of this company in Singapore, and they had told me that they would make sure that I could afford to go to Paris, because I told them I was only going to spend a day in Paris. And they said at that time, very indignantly, "You cannot come to Paris. We forbid you to come to Paris. You must stay, a week in Paris." And I said, I can't afford it, and I don't speak French. They said, we will take care of it. And so when I finally got to Paris, they did take care of it. But initially, there was the problem of how I was going to establish contact with their representative in Paris, who did not speak any English. And as I said, I spoke Spanish. I did not speak any French. So we are at the Gare de Lyon train station, and we managed to find a Spanish-speaking bartender who served as our interpreter from French into Spanish and back again for the next half hour, as I was able to work out all the logistical details for my stay. And it turned out to be one of the highlights. Paris turned out to be one of the highlights of my trip. It was lights out in the 16-bed dormitory, men's dormitory of the Cairo Youth Hostel. I was totally exhausted after 3 days of hard traveling, starting in New Delhi, going to Tehran, then Cairo, then down to Luxor, then back up to Cairo, and I had very little sleep. So I was looking forward to getting an early night's sleep. Well, as we were starting to settle down, another American, the only other American in the room, approached me. And then he loudly and angrily condemned the United States for its political corruption and cultural and economic imperialism. Now, these sentiments were echoed by a black South African. Remember, this was still at the time of apartheid. So he was very resentful toward the West and the United States, and a Colombian. So I decided that I was a bit outnumbered and that I was unlikely to prevail in any argument about the merits of the U.S. foreign policy and political system. So I decided that I would respond in an indirect fashion. First, I got everyone to agree that no country is perfect. Their own countries had flaws, their own governments had flaws. I got them to also agree that, of course, all the problems of the world were historical in nature and therefore the fault of past generations. And third, I got them to to joyfully agree with me that our generation was going to fix everything and usher in a brave new world. Now, my logic may not have been the best, but it was good enough for me to get a good night's sleep, which I think, after having been a diplomat and an intelligence officer during my career, I've learned that sometimes is the very best that you can hope for in a negotiation. Well, as I said, Paris was one of the best stops on my circumnavigation. And it was also a very interesting place to encounter not just French nationalism, but French opinions about the United States. So I was there. I arrived there in August of 1974, just a few days before Richard Nixon resigned. In the days leading up to the resignation, I was accosted several times on the streets of Paris by angry, viscerally angry Parisians who condemned the United States for allowing someone like Richard Nixon to continue in office, when to their eyes he was obviously unfit and corrupt. The day the resignation was announced, in the next couple of days, I had Parisians coming up to me, and once they realized that I was an American, they would embrace me. They would smile broadly, and sometimes even get a little bit tearful and say, we cannot believe how wonderful the United States is. If we had had that political crisis in our country, we would not have had a peaceful transition. The Republic would have fallen. Just goes to prove what a difference a day makes. Well, like most Foundation scholars, I encountered a couple of health issues during the course of my circumnavigation. The first one was quite frightening. I experienced it 3 times. In my first night in Japan, my first night in Thailand, and my first night in India. And that was night terrors, which are intense panic attacks in the middle of the night when you wake up or you're almost awake and you sense that there's an evil, malevolent presence in your room that intends you harm. And it is almost heart-stopping in how frightening it is. And it was a result of the stress of traveling far from home to several countries in a short period of time. And maybe it was the price of doing business as a foundation scholar, but it was not the positive highlight of my trip. The second issue was one that I'm sure that I shared with quite a few of my fellow foundation scholars, and that was gastrointestinal issues. I started feeling some of that distress in India and took an antidiarrheal medication that was supposed to be prescribed for 1 or 2 days. Well, I found that it worked. It kept the problem at bay, and I also found that I was going on to Iran and Egypt, Cyprus, and on to Europe, and that I was having new water, almost every day, new foods, a variety of new situations that would challenge my gastrointestinal system. So I decided that it made sense to keep taking the medication. It was a very small white pill. I mean, how much harm could it do? Well, it stopped me up for over 10 days and did not resolve itself until I was walking to the Tivoli Gardens amusement park in Copenhagen. And I found that I had to run from the street, setting a land speed record, into a restaurant, undiplomatically grabbing a person who was about to go into a stall, shoving him aside, and taking care of business. The Dane who I had pushed aside initially was going, "Hey!" But after a few seconds, he realized the situation. He said, "Take your time. Take your time." Since April of my junior year, so 1974, when I received the Circumnavigators Club Foundation Fellowship, I had looming over me a 30-minute speech that I was supposed to give at a dining room in the United Nations before an audience of VIPs and Circumnavigators Club members. That I would give this in September following my trip, and that I would, over the summer, have become wise into the intricacies of the issue of nationalism, which I was studying, and I would be a wise traveler, and that I would be able to come up with this wonderful half-hour speech. I was terrified. And this was something that every day of my trip, as I was keeping my journal, I was thinking, how am I going to put what I learned today into that speech? So I went through the trip, came back to Georgetown, started my first semester of my senior year, and then went up in mid-September to New York to speak at the Circumnavigators Club Foundation luncheon. Before I was due to speak, I was served all sorts of nice food, none of which I felt I could touch very much. I was a bit nervous about making the speech. And I found that as the luncheon moved on, the amount of time remaining for my speech was narrowing. So finally, when I was about to get up to give my speech, which I had carefully prepared, the president of the foundation turned to me and whispered in my ear. She says, "Okay, kid, we're running late. So what I need is a 5-minute impromptu delivery of 2 anecdotes and a couple of lessons learned. Go for it." And so instead of giving a prepared speech, I ended up doing an impromptu performance, which I think pleased everyone, at least sufficiently that I got some polite applause and was allowed to join the Circumnavigators Club as a full member. Academically, my circumnavigation was useful to me in 3 ways. First, it provided a sense of immediacy and pragmatism to my studies and gave me more of an appreciation of the limitations of theories. That theories of international relations or foreign affairs were fine, but sometimes they did not survive the test of reality that you can only find out in the field, such as I did in the course of my circumnavigation. Second, just the very experience of talking to American diplomats overseas, foreign government representatives, people on the street, young, old, and business people, that about my topic and other issues, it gave me a greater sense of confidence and poise that translated into me being a good contributing member in class in a variety of discussions. And then thirdly, it strengthened my desire to continue to do graduate studies in a program similar to Georgetown. Georgetown had a multidisciplinary approach, and it was also reality-based as much as possible. And so I applied to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy up at Tufts University, and I believe that my circumnavigation added some gravitas to my application and made me a more attractive candidate. In fact, I was fortunate enough to receive a full scholarship to go to graduate school after that, and found Fletcher to be a great continuation of my preparation for a career in the foreign affairs arena of public service. My circumnavigation, by giving me more of a sense of what the real world was like beyond the classroom, enhanced my attractiveness to the Foreign Service of the Department of State, the U.S. Department of State. And that I strongly believe that because I had undertaken the circumnavigation, that I was able to answer questions from experienced diplomats during my oral examination in ways that reflected someone with a higher level of maturity and pragmatic real-world experience than the typical college senior or graduate student. And so I was able to enter the Foreign Service and served as a Foreign Service officer for 9 years in a variety of assignments. First, I was staff assistant to the director of the State Department's Foreign Service Institute, which is their training arm. I then studied Mandarin Chinese for a couple of years, and I served as a consular officer and as a political officer in Taipei, Taiwan, Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and Guangzhou, China. Uh, After serving overseas in those assignments, I came back to the State Department and served as a China analyst in the department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And that experience led me to a detour from my original plan to pursue a diplomatic career into the intelligence field. And I transferred over from the State Department to the Central Intelligence Agency to become their senior China analyst responsible for following China's relations with the United States, the Soviet Union, Europe, and Japan. After that assignment, I moved on to various other CIA positions. Some of them were, I was an intelligence collection requirements manager. I was an editor and backup briefer on the President's Daily Brief during the George H.W. Bush administration. And had the opportunity to brief Secretary of State Baker, Secretary of Defense Cheney, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. So that was quite stimulating there. I returned from that assignment to become a tradecraft trainer and then a senior budget officer, a counterintelligence risk analyst, and in my final assignment, I was the embedded intelligence community liaison back to the State Department for the planning and construction of the new U.S. Embassy Chancery in Beijing, as well as the new Chinese Embassy Chancery in Washington, D.C. I retired early in 2003 when I was 50 years old to join General Dynamics, where I was initially the lead on a team of experts who helped set up the Department of Homeland Security. And then I returned to CIA again, but this time as a contractor with General Dynamics, where I was in the operations center for several years, analyzing foreign news broadcasts using some sophisticated software for their daily intelligence report within the CIA community. In 2009, my wife and I formed a consulting firm, two-person consulting firm, specializing in interpersonal and intercultural communication for individuals and organizations. And then more recently, I've stepped back and am now just doing some part-time consulting with my brother. And we have developed a unique course where we blend my CIA and State Department experience with his business experience to teach a sales tradecraft course. Most of my time now, when I'm not helping out the foundation as the coordinator emeritus, I am enjoying myself as a grandparent, golfer, reader, and to a much more limited extent than I wish for, as a traveler. Can't wait for the pandemic to end. Planning and undertaking my circumnavigation taught me some valuable life lessons. First, you cannot plan for every contingency. Second, you cannot resolve every crisis on your own. And third, you cannot travel for 90 days on a daily budget of $5 a day without losing weight. In my case, 20 pounds. I would have 3 pieces of advice for prospective foundation scholars. First, do your homework beforehand. Second, be flexible so that you can pursue unexpected opportunities as well as deal with unexpected setbacks. And 3, pay it forward after your circumnavigation by joining the foundation as a donor, as a volunteer, or even as an officer. You will not be sorry that you did. The Circumnavigators Club Foundation Fellowship provides an unparalleled opportunity to explore your research topic and the world. It gives you a chance to develop your strengths, identify and compensate for your vulnerabilities, and perhaps, if you're lucky, to discover your potential in areas you never dreamed that you had that potential. Third, it is an investment, a great investment for the student involved, for the sponsoring school, for the foundation, and for the world at large. I have been involved with the foundation for over 30 years. I was the first chapter coordinator for the foundation for the Washington, D.C. chapter, and enjoyed that so much I did not relinquish the position for 25 years. It was a great opportunity to stay involved with my alma mater, Georgetown, and with the students. The students never got any older. I did, but each year I was 20 years old again and exploring the world through their eyes, and it was just wonderful. I retired as the Washington, D.C. chapter coordinator a few years back and was asked by the foundation to stay on the Board of Governors as the foundation's coordinator emeritus, advising the various chapter coordinators based on my experience at Georgetown. And that's been great as well. Well, it is hard to believe that it's been 50 years, a full half century, since Greg Ryder was the first foundation scholar to go around the world. Since that time, 140 scholars have embarked on journeys of discovery and self-discovery under the auspices of the foundation. The foundation has every right to be proud of its accomplishments, but it also has the right to dream of even bigger accomplishments over the next 50 years. I'd love to see the foundation sponsor more students each year from more universities so that we can spread the wealth beyond the few universities that are fortunate enough to partner with us in the fellowship. So congratulations, Circumnavigators Club Foundation, on 50 great years, and here's to 50 great years more.